And good evening, everybody. Dr. Bill Tulo, Chief Medical Officer at Oculus Inc., and welcome to Perfecting Fit and Function Wave Lens Design with the Keratograph 5M with Jamie Kuzniar. Before I introduce Dr. Kuzniar, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please put questions into the chat box so at the end of our presentation, we'll get to answer as many as we can. Um, Dr. Jamie Kuzniar is founder of Elevate Eye Care and Eyewear, earned her doctorate of optometry from Michigan College of Optometry at Ferris State University, and completed a corneal disease and contact lens residency at Indiana University. She specializes in fitting gaspermeable and scleral contact lenses, myopia management, and orthokeratology design in dry eye. Dr. Kuzniar has garnered numerous awards, including the Clinical Excellence in Gas Permeable Contact Lens Award, and is recognized as one of Newsweek's top 25 eye doctors in America for 3 consecutive years. Wow. A fellow of the Scleral Lens Society and the American Academy of Optometry, as well as an advisory board member for GPLI. She lectures nationally on specialty contact lenses, dry eye, and keratoconus. Without no further ado, Dr. Jamie Kuzniar, take it away. Take it away.
All right. Thanks so much, Bill, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. So I'm not sure where all of you are joining us from, but if you're part of the Midwest, we're getting a huge snowstorm right now. So thanks for jumping in, especially if your kids have snow days tomorrow like mine do. So today we're going to talk about wave lenses and actually designing them with the Keratograph 5M. So super excited to talk to you about this little topic here. So some of the things that we're going to talk about the Keratograph, just basics of it there. We're going to talk about some tips on capturing the best baseline maps for designing your wave lenses. We're going to talk about which wave lenses that you can use specifically with the Keratograph. And then I'm actually going to go through 2 cases that I worked with within the past year using a wave night lens and then a wave corneal lens. And then lastly, we're going to talk about a really cool feature that the Keratograph also has, which is imaging, which can help you document your fit and also help you if you're working with different labs or with Wave to maybe troubleshoot some of your lenses as well. So a little background, I know you might have heard when Bill introduced me that I started Elevate Eye Care and Eyewear about 2.5 years ago. So I was a cold start. So when I'm a cold start, you're getting a lot of patients from pretty much anywhere that you can, right? So when you're a new practice or maybe even an established practice that's trying to build your specialty lens sub practice within it, you're always looking for a way to kind of set yourself apart. And I felt like Wave was a really great way for me to do that. So what exactly is Wave? So Wave is a software based lens design system that actually can give you a completely customized gas perm lens experience for your patients. So it's really amazing. You can either like design the lens right in front of your patients, but basically it's being able to offer your patient an even more customized GP experience. So there's 3 lenses available: corneal lens, which is a corneal gas perm that's free form; night lens, which is going to be the ortho K lens; and scleral lens is also available. So what we're doing is using topography guided lens to basically, if somebody is a really complex patient, we can use the topography from either the Keratograph or the Pentacam or various other machines to create a completely freeform lens for that patient, instead of something a little bit more off the shelf or something that's just from a diagnostic lens. So really, it's helped me a lot to set myself apart for either patients that have a really extreme need for ortho K. So maybe they have a high amount of myopia or a lot of astigmatism, or just a standard ortho K lens, they fall outside of those guidelines or there's not a lens option for them. It's also helped a lot for corneal lens. Interestingly enough, I'm in the Metro Detroit area, and I have a lot of friends that fit scleral lenses, and oftentimes they don't refer to me patients that need sclerals. I have a lot of doctors that don't like to fit gas perms anymore. So I know when I was in school, just starting out, we were really starting to learn a lot about sclerals, and I think a lot of other new grads learned so much about sclerals, but we've kind of lost those skills about how to fit a corneal gas perm, especially on a really irregular cornea. Sometimes it can be really tricky. You know, with the scleral lens, you're just kind of vaulting over that whole irregular surface, but with a gas perm, you really have to kind of fine tune that fit a little bit more. So at some point, sometimes these corneal gas perms can actually be more difficult to fit than a scleral lens patients. So it's kind of funny to me that I have more and more corneal gas perm patients finding my practice because their doctors no longer offer that service if they don't want a scleral lens. So it's just a nice option where, I love sclerals. I'm sure if you've seen me lecture before, I talk about sclerals a lot. But I still have a lot of patients that either prefer or need a corneal gas perm lens for one reason or another. So looking at the Keratograph, the Oculus Keratograph, I've personally been using this device. Oh gosh, how long have I been using this? I've been using this device for about 8 years across 3 different clinics. So when I started my cold start, I knew that this was the topographer that I wanted in my practice because it's always worked so well for me. Because it, number one, takes really great topography. I knew I'd be able to incorporate Wave software, and it also has a really great dry eye suite. So it is a Placido disc topographer. So it's using white ring illumination, and it generates 22,000 real data points for each measurement, which is pretty incredible. The great thing about the dry eye software, which I kind of alluded to as well, is that it actually uses an infrared illumination to do a tear film analysis as well. So while it's analyzing the tear film, you're not getting a lot of reflex tearing for your patients. It also has meibography. So that helped me a lot for the dry eye side of my practice within the Keratograph as well. One thing that the Keratograph does not measure, though, is scleroprofilometry. That would be something that your Pentacam CSP would measure for you, which is a different device that Oculus provides. So the Keratograph, we're going to be mostly talking about night lens and corneal lens today, just because it doesn't measure all the way out to that scleral profile that you would need when you're designing scleral lens for Wave. So looking at some of the initial capture, so some of the main goals, and I wanted to point out with, especially in this little picture here, when you're looking at your maps, or maybe you're having your technicians take your maps, one thing I always used to tell my technicians is I want you to take at least 5 scans of any patient that I'm designing a custom Wave lens for, okay? Maybe it's not as important to get that really great image if you're just doing like a baseline topography for documentation. But if I'm going to be using an initial capture for a Wave lens, I want the best lens, and the best topography out there, okay? So multiple images, that way I can look and pick the exact one I want. So some things to look out for, and you can kind of see in a picture I have here. One of them, this is a little bit of an irregular cornea patient, but if you look at the rings in the middle, you want to make sure that there's not any broken rings due to the dryness, okay? Because this uses a Placido disc, if there is a lot of dryness on the surface or maybe something in the tear film, it's going to create the maps that are not 100% accurate. So you want to look at those rings and make sure they're nice and crisp, okay? The next thing, looking at the top arrow, you can kind of see how you can see the patient's reflection of their eyelashes. So those eyelashes can also interfere with your map, therefore interfering with the software of the Wave, okay? The other thing down at the bottom right, you can kind of see that the rings are missing in that quadrant. That's actually from the patient's nose, okay? So the Keratograph is a really wide, so actually I don't have as much issues with nose interaction, but if you do see that, they might need to kind of angle their head a little bit differently to get a better view of that area if the nose is blocking some of that quadrant there. So just some things that you want to keep in mind when you're looking at your maps is really looking at the picture of what you're taking. The other thing too is that I want at least 75% analyzed area or higher. And I'll show you where that is at a future slide, but I want that number to be 75% or higher. If it's a lower analyzed area, that just means that there's a lot of data that might be extrapolated and it's not true data. So it might lead to a little bit more remakes versus having a first lens success. And I believe that is true in any type of lens that you're designing, whether it be Wave or not, but specifically for Wave because it's topography guided. So some considerations with Wave. So when I first started using Wave a couple of years ago, there was a little bit of a learning curve that I had to learn with my Keratograph. So I'm here to show you some of these little tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. Wave is a super great software, but once I learned these couple things that I needed to adjust because of my topographer being the Keratograph, I think it'll set you up for better success without having as many remakes or maybe even 0 remakes, okay? So one thing that I found, and this was the most important, is that I actually need to increase my edge lift with the Keratograph when I'm designing a Wave lens, okay? Compared to if you're using a Pentacam. So a Pentacam, you're going to be getting full limbal to limbal coverage of your map. With the keratograph, that the map does not go fully all the way out to the limbus. Okay, so that area that gets closer to the limbus is a little bit more extrapolated. So if you're having a larger gas perm lens that gets kind of out closer to that limbus, that data is not always 100% accurate. But what I found is that if we increase the edge lift with the keratograph for night lens and cornea lens, with night lens I increase it 30 microns, and with cornea lens I increase it 40 microns. What that does is it creates a much better fit for my patient. Initially, when I was designing my first wave lenses, I was just kind of clicking the design button and ordering them right away, and the lenses were coming out really, really tight. What I found out is this is kind of the secret sauce by going in and automatically increasing that to 30 microns and 40 microns respectively, and my lenses have been a lot better for first fit success. So here's a little bit of recommendations for night lens, okay? And these are my own personal recommendations that I actually nicknamed when I was first getting Wave set up. They even named it, myopia management for Elevate. So if you have your own practice and there's your own settings that you want to do, they can put a template settings in there so you don't have to automatically adjust every single design. So the ones I wanted to point out, if I'm doing a night lens for myopia management specifically, I always am going to have that edge lift at 30 microns automatically. So that is something a little bit different because I have the keratograph. The other thing I like to do is have the back optic zone to be a 5.5 or smaller, because I am doing myopia management. One thing that you should always pay attention to, if you are adjusting that back optic zone diameter, you want your IC to be about 0.6 larger than that, okay? So if you want that a little bit bigger or smaller, that's totally fine. Just make sure you're also adjusting your IC diameter as well. When I look at HVID, this is something that I pick depending on the patient, okay? So HVID, I will physically measure that for whatever patient I have, and I want my overall lens diameter to be about 90 to 95% of that HVID. So I measure that from the map, and then I put that in there, the amount of the lens diameter that I want for that specific patient. So those are a couple things that I automatically set here before I hit the start design button. I personally like to use Prism. You can see that little Prism box at the bottom. I personally like to use Prism when I'm using a freeform lens. I know I talked to some fitters that don't like to use Prism. Basically, I just found that when I clicked that Prism box, it did just kind of help my fits to lock in a little bit better for my freeform patient. So the other thing that I want you to keep an eye on too is the edge thickness and center thickness. So for center thickness, I do like to keep it a little bit thicker because a lot of times I have kids cleaning these lenses and taking them in and out. I find that sometimes if that center thickness was a little bit too thin, the lens is more likely to break when they're handling it just because it is a child. And also some of my adults. I mean, I have a lens that I had one of my adults patient break, and I went back and I looked, and my center thickness was only like 0.16 because I was kind of tinkering around with the edges and the base curve and all of this, and all of a sudden that lens got super thin, and I didn't really notice it. So something to kind of keep in mind when you are designing these lenses, because this is something where you have more control over it. It's not just you calling into a lab and they're designing it for you. You are the designer when you're using Wave. Just kind of keep in mind that center thickness, especially when you are working with younger patients or patients that might not be so great at handling your lenses. So we'll move into the first case where I did a Wave night lens. So this was a patient I saw this fall, and she came in, she was a 17-year-old female. She actually came in from almost an hour away to my office because she actually heard about Ortho-K on TikTok of all places, right? So interestingly enough, that was her chief complaint. She came in, I want Ortho-K lenses. I heard you fit Wave lenses, and I heard about them on TikTok. So, all right, let's go for it. She wasn't wearing her glasses when she came in, so I just said, "Oh, are you wearing soft lenses?" "No, I just only wear my glasses when I need to." I said, "Okay." I read her glasses. She's over a -6, which as a 17-year-old, that is kind of insane to me that she's only wearing her glasses as needed when I'm a -7 myself, right? I think when you need them is all the time, right? So she just hated the look of her glasses. She hated the feel of her glasses. She was really um, aware aware of what she looked like with glasses, but she was never comfortable with soft lenses. So she just kind of lived in this world of a blur, which was kind of crazy. Like her dad had to drive her to her appointments because she never even went to get her driver's license. So she came to this appointment. She actually, as a 17-year-old, paid for her lenses out of pocket too because she was so motivated that she wanted these wave lenses. So a little backstory there. But if you look at her manifest, I mean, she's a higher myope. K's look pretty normal though. And then this is her baseline map. So looking at her baseline map, a couple things I wanted to point out. The first arrow here on the very bottom pointing up, this symbol right here, this is going to be her HUID. So she is a little bit of a larger cornea. So she's a 12.04. And then also I wanted to point out the percentage here. So she has a 79% map. We took multiple maps. This was one that I felt was the best out of all of them. So it was a really nice, clean map. I mean, you do have a little tiny area where you can probably see a little bit of her nose and maybe a little eyelashes, but a 79% is a pretty good map, especially on a teenager. So um, here's her first right lens design. So if you've never seen Wave before, when I first saw this screen, I'm like, wow, this is a lot going on, right? So basically all I had to do was put in her HVID and I put in her manifest refraction and we hit design, okay, with my pre-settings. And so this is the lens that it spun out for me. And a nice thing about Wave too, in one of the maps that I really like to look at, in this top left, you can kind of see how there's this quad view. The map I like to look at the most is actually this fluorescing map, and you can zoom in on that as well. And that'll actually give you a predicted fluorescing pattern of the lens that you're designing as you're making changes. You can also kind of click around to the different quadrants to see precisely what your design looks like. But overall, when we started out, this was the lens that was designed for her. One thing I did do, because she is 17, so she's like a high myope. We're kind of doing myopia management, but at the same time, I'm thinking she's probably going to start driving, going to start night driving. I made that OZ a little bit bigger to try to give her a little bit better vision, especially being a high myope. So I did start her at a 5.7. Okay. So this was her first right lens that we designed here. This was her first left lens. So they look actually pretty similar. She had a pretty symmetrical eyes. And I do also like to customize what color my night lenses come in. For my patients, I like to do red for the right eye because R means red. And I like to do yellow for the left, two L's in yellow. So I always do that for my night lens patients, especially because they're not wearing them during the daytime anyway. So even if someone was looking at their eyes, they wouldn't wonder why they're wearing red or yellow contacts. But it does help to tell them apart. I know you can also do um, blue and green, but sometimes those look pretty similar when they get through the lathe. So I like to do red and yellow. So that's my own little trick. Every single parent has absolutely loved that I've done that. So I don't get any phone calls of, I think my kid might have switched their lenses. Um, all right, so looking at the dispense on the first day, and I will say too, these pictures are not from the Keratograph. These are from my slit lamp, so that's why they're not super clear. It's a little tricky to take dispense pictures a lot of times just because usually the patient is trying to adapt to wearing a lens on their eyes. Sometimes you might not get a super great look if their eyes are really watery and they're kind of flushing that fluorescein out of there. But this is the dispense of their first lenses. I mean, one thing I will point out is on the right eye, you can see that she does have a little tiny bubble here in the return zone. That's pretty common, especially if you have a really high prescription that you're treating. If you look back, I mean, this is a big return zone area because it's got to move a lot of tissue, you know. So she does have a little bubble there. I'm not overly worried about that bubble. Usually, if I see a bubble like that, I'll just advise them that when they're filling the lens to put a couple drops of saline in there, or even like a little bit of a gel. That way, when they put it on their eye, they don't get that bubble. It's a little bit more comfortable. The other thing too, I did notice with my pictures too, is she did have, it looked like a little bit minimal edge lift on there as well. Again, kind of hard to tell on the first day dispense just because the patient's uncomfortable. They don't want the lenses on their eyes super long. Their eyes are tearing. But what I'm seeing is I have a nice, really good ring. It's pretty centered, maybe a little bit low on the right eye. But I say let's let them go, right? So at her first follow-up, I actually chose for this patient to dispense the lenses on a Friday and have her start wearing them over the weekend and follow up on a Monday. I did that for a couple reasons. This patient's in high school, so if I had her start during the week, I know that it's going to take her a little bit of time to get down to more functional vision. And that in between time is a little tricky, especially if you're in a high school class trying to see the board. If your patient is driving, it gets a little tricky. So I like to do that over the weekend. And that way, if their vision isn't perfect on day one or day two, it's okay because it's the weekend. They can kind of lay low. They don't need to worry about taking exams, writing essays, etc. for that. So I dispensed the lenses on Friday. I had her come back on Monday. She was already 20/30, 20/40, 20/25 with both eyes. That to me is pretty good. I mean, especially considering this patient was walking around with no glasses, surprisingly, most of the time. Her manifest was a -150, so she was pretty centered treatment zones, just a little undercorrected still, but it was only a couple days in, so I was actually pretty darn happy with it. She was actually had a little bit of lens awareness still. Again, very normal because it had been a couple days of wear. She'd never worn a contact really before. And then she was also noticing near blur. Um, I wasn't overly worried about this near blur, especially because she's a little bit under corrected. But a lot of it might be because she wasn't wearing her full prescription ever, and she was so nearsighted that she's never actually had to accommodate before, right? So sometimes when you're fitting kids or adults in ortho K, number one, make sure you're not overcorrecting them. Okay. And if you're not overcorrecting them, it might just mean that their accommodation kind of has to catch up a little bit with them. And then here's my comparison. When I use my Keratograph, I like to have my baseline map versus today's scan on the comparison just to kind of see exactly what's going on. This is a tangential map. So exam A was her baseline, which is why it's so important to get good baselines because you're never going to get that perfect baseline back again unless you wash your patient out. So baseline, I even mark it in the notes. That way I know exactly which map I designed it from. And then exam B would be after a couple nights of wear, and this just does a subtractive map, so you can really see. I mean, that's a really darn centered bullseye pattern, and I'm really happy with that. So I said, all right, we're in for another week. It will come up at about like a week and a half, so about a 10-day follow-up. She did say that, her vision was lasting longer throughout the day, but she was still getting a little bit of blur and a little bit of glare. Her vision kind of was still stuck at that 20/30, 20/25 range. And again, that kind of minimal edge lift there that we noted. So I'm thinking, okay, I mean, she's got centered treatment zones, but they're a little bit small. They're a little bit under corrected still. And I do want to maybe increase that edge lift to get her a little bit better tear exchange so that she has a little bit more comfort, especially because it's been about a week and a half at this point. She didn't have any staining though, so that is one thing too. I like to look at the cornea and make sure that she doesn't have staining, either in the center or around the edges. No staining there, but I just thought to increase the comfort a little bit, what I'm going to do is increase the edge lift. I'm going to increase that optic zone just to give her a little bit bigger space because she is kind of that 17 to 18-year-old. I know we're still trying to manage myopia, but at this point, she shouldn't progress too much more. So I'm okay opening that up a little bit. And then I just wanted to decrease the return zone depth as well, just to give her a little bit more treatment. So the nice thing when you're doing night lens is you can go back to your design and we can actually do a few modifications, okay? So these are some modifications that you might see with night lens. So the one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to open up her optic zone diameter because she was still getting some glare and halos there. So you can just select optic zone diameter here. You can choose to increase or decrease it. For her, I increased it, and you could choose whatever amount you wanted to, okay? I think in her situation, I'll see in the next slide, I think I increased it by like 0.2, 0.3. I'll look to see which one it is, but you can really choose the exact amount that you want to change that lens by. Looking at the return zone, what we do here is you can just click on return zone. You can increase or decrease sag as needed, and again in 10 micron steps increments. You can choose to do it all the way around. You can do one quadrant. You can do it just one meridian. So for this patient, I chose to decrease her sag. But then what you also have to do, and this is a little trick that Wave Consultation taught me as well. Whenever you're decreasing that return zone, what you also have to do is you kind of have to modify the alignment zone in return. So every time I do a decrease sag by say 10, I do an increase sag by 10 of the alignment zone, okay? So basically you're bringing that lens down, but you're also changing the edge so it doesn't completely lift off and flare out. So I've had that issue in the past too, but Shout out to Shelby from consultation. She gave me this little hack that every time I'm changing my return zone, you just basically want to make a counter change in your alignment zone. That way you don't lose alignment at the same time with wave. So this was the second lens that I designed for her. So it starts to look a little weird. If you guys have seen, you know, people present their beautiful night lenses on the podium, I'm sure a lot of times it doesn't look like this, but that's okay. I know what my topographer looks like, and I know what the lens on eye looks like. So yeah, it does look a little wonky here. It's totally fine. Okay. So just kind of trust the software, trust yourself, right? You can kind of see too that the fluorescein map is changing a little bit there to let a little bit more fluorescein in. And then I did bring up her edge lift to closer to like 40, so about like 36 microns. So I did increase it a little bit, not a ton. So I increased that a little bit there for comfort, widened that optic zone. Actually, I widened it a little bit more to a 6.2. So I widened it by about 0.5 just to give her a little bit better vision that way. So really small changes. But overall, I was just hoping to kind of fine tune it without completely losing that great alignment. Did the same exact changes for the left lens as well there. So new lens maps, you can see that the lens, we still have really great centration, but what we're seeing is more treatment in a wider treatment zone, okay? I'm still within the pupil to get a little bit more myopia management still, especially as she goes off to college, but it is a little bit wider, okay? So with this, the patient was happy. She had a lot better comfort. She had a lot better vision. She was 20/20-ish, okay? Or 20 happy, as we like to say. She was not complaining about glare or halos anymore. I mean, if she still was complaining about glare, I might widen that return zone a little bit, or the optic zone a little bit more for her, but she was happy. I was happy. And that's a pretty darn good outcome, especially for a high myope. High myopes can be really tricky. I should know because I am one. And I remember trying Ortho K lenses about 10 years ago. And it was really tough to get a centered map on me. So with my high myopes, I have really great centration success with wave. And again, here's a comparison of the first lens, which is on the left, versus the second lens on the right. So again, the centration stayed really good, even though I made those changes to the optic zone and the return zone to give a little bit more treatment. I didn't all of a sudden start getting the lens moving around a lot. So a little bit better defined ring, a little bit wider treatment zone there, still got great centration, good comfort for the patient. The other thing too that you can do is a nice format comparison. This is kind of nice if you're making a change, or maybe you just want to see, baseline here after the first weekend, after the first week and a half, and then after her second lens. You can kind of see the progression of that lens, but especially looking from exam B to C. After the first couple of days, she had a really great treatment, but then she kind of got stuck in there. So even though it was an extra week, that treatment just kind of stayed where it was. And that's where I knew I had to make a lens change, that she wasn't still widening. It was kind of like at the limit of the lens at that point. So this is a nice comparison. And I like to show these a lot to the parents. They like to see it. They like to see what change you made. They like to see how their kid is doing. They think it's the coolest thing. Sometimes they take pictures of it. It kind of, gets rid of the mystery behind of what's going on with Ortho K and why this thing works, right? So really great features, again, with the Keratograph, using all those comparison maps, really great outcomes with my wave night lens patients as well. So moving on to wave cornea lens. I always feel like cornea lens doesn't get enough love, man. People always talk about night lens, but cornea lens is pretty darn awesome. The fact that you can design a free-form corneal gas perm lens, I think a lot of people just kind of forget that this lens option exists. So I had a patient, a 63-year-old male. He came in for a specialty lens fitting. He had a history of RK. He was post-graft, but he also had Fuchs. Okay, if you look at his manifest refraction, yeah, clearly he has a ton of aniso. There's no way that man is wearing that pair of glasses that can actually get him to see that functional vision. What he was currently doing was actually just wearing a balance lens in one eye and fully correcting the left eye. So really kind of walking around monocular at all times. So he was currently wearing gas perm lenses, but just felt like they weren't comfortable and he wanted to try something else. So actually before we tried cornea lens, I thought, well, let's try a scleral lens, right? So we did a scleral lens because of his Fuchs. he had corneal edema, so we had to discontinue those. We also tried custom soft lenses, again, corneal edema. Um, we also tried hybrid lenses, again, corneal edema. So we actually tried multiple modalities with him because of his main complaint of comfort. Okay. So then it got back to the point, well, okay, what are we going to do when the only lens that you can wear is a corneal lens um, functionally for your eye, but they're just not really that comfortable. So here's his baseline topography. So you can see, even like looking at the Myers, his eye is a little wonky, right? His maps don't look 100% clean because of how his tear film is also. And honestly, I didn't love that the percentage of his maps was like 47% and 62%, mostly because he was wearing another corneal gas perm lens coming into this appointment. So sometimes when they're already wearing a corneal gas perm lens and then you're trying to take these maps, um, those maps might not be 100% accurate because that lens is already kind of warping everything for them. But at this point, you kind of got to do what you can, unless you can have the patient discontinue lenses for a couple weeks, which isn't always practical, especially if they're working and driving. So these were the maps that I was working with, which are not perfect, but they were the best that I could. So these were his current traditional gas perm lenses that he was wearing. One of them was a Rose K post-graft lens on the right eye. So, I mean, not awful. I mean, it was kind of sliding all over the place on him, but he could see pretty well with it. The left eye was just a standard reverse geometry lens, but that lens was more comfortable for him, but it was actually bound to his cornea. So every time he would come in, that lens would just be stuck there. He could see really well, and he didn't feel it, but it was really stuck to his cornea, which I didn't love either. Um, but I knew, okay, we need to stick to a corneal lens. How are we going to make this better? So I thought, let's try a corneal lens, I guess you could say. So I designed some lenses off of his maps. So you can see the top one is his right lens. The bottom is the left. Okay. So when you're looking at corneal lens, a lot of times I just kind of plug everything in and I hit design. The main thing that I change for this is just that edge lift, right? Like I talked about the edge lift with the Keratograph, I always want to put the edge lift up at 40 microns. So that way that lens doesn't bind down. But otherwise, in the middle, sometimes it looks a little wonky. That's okay. It's basically filling in all those spaces of his irregular cornea, all the kind of the lumps and the bumps and the areas there with fluorescein. So this is just kind of showing you where those fluorescein changes are going to be. So here are his lenses. So if you look too, looking at his left eye, if you don't recall, his base curve, it really isn't that different than what his previous lens was. But the difference is that this is a completely freeform lens. So I'm not just making a flatter or a steeper base curve all the way around. And this is also something that sometimes confuses the heck out of my technician when she's trying to figure out what exact power is this lens? What does this mean? You know, plus 378 plus or minus 289, you know? She's like, how do I even put these values in here, right? So this is a completely freeform lens. So even though it's a kind of similar base curve to what he was wearing, the lens is totally different, okay? For this patient in particular, once I dispensed this lens, he still had a little bit too much edge lift, or sorry, not enough edge lift. So I actually had to bump that up a little bit. The other thing too, if you need to make any more changes with cornea lens, there's all these nice little dots, and there's so many different wave webinars that you can go into that go into specifically what everything is. But a couple tips I'll give you if you do just want to make a base, change the base curve kind of all the way around, you're going to use these orange dots here, okay? And you're going to click on this dot here, and you're going to raise it or lower it and just kind of watch this power button. So say you really love it, but you just want to change the base curve by a half diopter, 3/4 a diopter, you can just do base changes to cornea lens without making it too complicated. So that is one thing you can do. You can make changes to each quadrant too. So since this is free form, you can kind of click anywhere around this map here, and you can really just change. Maybe I just need more edge lift in one quadrant. You can really just change it here. You can change this completely. One thing to pay attention to too, though, is once you have the lens on eye, look at how those lens markings are. So there'll be lens markings to tell what rotation you have on a freeform lens. If for some reason that lens is rotated, and as long as it's rotated and constantly the same way, that's okay. But just remember that when you're making changes to the map, you need to take that into account, okay? So even though you might think that you're changing something nasally, if the lens is rotated like 45 degrees like this, you have to remember that nasal on the map is not going to be nasal on the lens, okay? So one thing to keep in mind, usually I don't have that much of an issue with that rotation, but on occasion I have had the lens not sitting 100% perfect. So just kind of keep that in mind when you are making changes to cornea lens, okay? And at first, this might seem really complicated, and it's totally fine to ask for consultation help. I ask for consultation help all the time. They're really super friendly. They can actually just do a little screen share with you and walk you through what they're changing. And then over time, you start to get a lot more confident on how to make little troubleshooting changes for your patients as well. So looking at this patient's cornea lenses, so right eye and left eye, I mean, they look really darn good. So he had really comfortable lenses. His vision was great. He decided to do monovision. He's 20/20 distance, 20/25 near with how his lenses are. So you can kind of see the markings here on this right eye. You see how, so this is a really stable lens. So when you're making the changes, you just kind of keep in mind and make sure that you don't have rotation. The left eye, he did have a little slight rotation here, not the end of the world. This lens does move a little bit more with him, but he's comfortable with it. So this patient has been seeing me. He drives from over an hour away. He loves his wave lenses. He always buys them, two pair at a time. And he's just one of those patients that once you have them, they're not ever going to go anywhere else because you've fit them in a completely customized lens that they can't just call another office and get, right? So you've given them an option that's totally customizable. And it's a great option for patients like this that cannot wear a different modality type of lens, or maybe they just want to stay in a corneal guest firm. You can still help them. And then again, just kind of like wrapping it up, looking at some of the imaging and the videos on the Keratograph, they're really great. I couldn't put one of my video files in there. I was having an issue because I have a Mac now, and it makes things all funny with my videos for my Keratograph to put them into PowerPoint. But the videos are phenomenal. You can see like an example of how detailed the fluorescein images are. Here, that's one of my scleral lenses, and you can just see, like, you can even read an ID number on there with the picture. The fluorescein just pops in there. Or even if you want to document things, like I have a cornea here on the right, where I wanted to document all of his neo that we had before we were starting to fit. That way, if there is something that you want to document, especially with your grafts, or even any type of anterior segment disease, you can use the Keratograph to document those things throughout the progress, and you can see such good detail of the corneal blood vessels, of all of that. Or if you have an issue with your fit and maybe you need help with consultation, you can always take great images with fluorescein of the lens on the eye. Then that way they can truly see exactly what you were seeing in your slit lamp. They can help you fine tune that thing as well. And also, you can bill for images on your Keratograph as well. So you can bill anterior segment photography with it. So one other little tool that the Keratograph can do for you besides just baseline topography. So wrapping it up, just a reminder that the Keratograph, it is a placido disc topographer. So tear film stability is really important, okay? So if you have patients with drier eyes or any type of inflammation, sometimes you might have to put an artificial tear in. You might have to have them blink a few times just to make sure you're getting really good maps, especially if you're designing a custom lens. Make sure to take multiple maps. So again, just take 3 to 5, even more images. It's just a lot easier to take a bunch of images and pick the best one versus only taking one image. The patient leaves, you go to design the lens and you say, oh shoot, this isn't the best lens. And you have two choices: either call that patient back, which is inconvenient, or order a lens based on not a super great map. And sometimes you end up ordering more remakes and more chair time in the process. So it's a lot easier to take more maps up front versus what she did after the patient leaves. Also, just try to hone in your presets as you start to see more wave patients. So like myself, I used to just, boom, click the button and go. As I started to see, like, okay, these are certain things I'm always having to troubleshoot with my patients of a specific type, you can change some of your presets and maybe make it your own kind of protocol. That way, your first lens is always going to be the success for you. Okay. And again, using a pentacam versus a keratograph, you're going to have different presets a lot just because those two instruments are totally different in how they measure the cornea. And then just let the Wave software design the first lens and just kind of troubleshoot as needed. So once you get those presets there, design lens and go for it. Okay. Um, Most of the time, I picked a couple cases today where I did have to troubleshoot, but a lot of my patients, really, it's just the first lens is the lens that they end up using because it's totally customizable based on their topography. So usually, just the first lens is great, but don't design the first lens and then kind of try to tinker too much before you physically have that lens made, especially if you're just kind of getting into Wave. And then remember that consultation's there to help and learn from them. They're all super nice. They're happy to jump on a call and do a screen share. They'll look at the designs with you. If you have pictures on your Keratograph too, you can kind of toggle between. You show them the pictures of what's going on with the lens, and they can actually show you what they're changing with the Wave software. So then that way you can learn in the future, so you don't have to call them every single time you have the same issue. Night lens again is a really great option for more of these like difficult ortho K patients, or just basically if you every patient that comes in that needs ortho K, because it's a totally customizable lens and it kind of sets you apart from everybody else that might be doing a different type of ortho K lens. Don't forget about corneal lens. Again, a great free-form corneal gas perm option for those patients where maybe they can't wear a scleral lens. A corneal gas perm is still a great option. So I've done corneal lens on, keratoconus, on grafts, RK, like I just showed you. So it's a really great free-form option for your patient that truly can just customize exactly where their cone is, exactly how tilted their graft is, and a good option there. And again, Wave lenses, it's just a way to keep your patients coming back into your office because it's a totally different experience for them. And the patients are very happy. I mean, I've even had like regular cornea people that I've done a cornea lens on, and they're like, "This is the most comfortable lens I've ever had." And I said, "Yeah, it's because it's designed specifically for you. It's not just something that you plug into just a K's and RX calculator and it spits out a lens. So it's a completely customized lens for the shape of your eye. So it just kind of sets yourself apart. I had a corneal lens patient that I did that for, and they actually sent me their whole family that does soft lenses and glasses and dry eye. So once you kind of wow someone with this technology, it really builds on itself, and you can gather a lot more patients and sell a lot more lenses. So thank you, everybody. Now, does anyone have any questions about the Keratograph, about the Wave software, anything that you
Jamie,
got?
we do have some really good questions. The
Good.
first question I'm going to share with you is: do you find that the HVID measured with the Keratograph is pretty accurate?
I actually do, but I do like to remeasure it with the caliper. So I do physically measure it also with the caliper, just in case the image was like a little funny. Um, I've used other topographers, whether when I'm doing wet labs, um, and sometimes those are overestimating the cornea a ton. But I feel like my keratograph is super accurate. I'm not just saying this because I'm on this webinar. I mean, I have other topographers I've used that it could be off by like 0.5. I really go for it with the keratograph because I think it's super accurate. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Bill, but I find
Yeah,
it good.
I would agree with you. It's certainly accurate. What's unique though is that I've had 5 topographers over the last 38 years, and they're all different and they're all unique, and you have to learn your instrument. When I switch, for
Right,
example, when I switch from Atlas to Keratograph and then Keratograph to Pentacam and all these changes, I had to relearn my instrument because, for example, my Keratograph, I would traditionally subtract about zero point 0.7 from my HVID to determine my diameter of my ortho K lens. And with my Pentacam, it's not an HVID. Technically, it's a horizontal white to
yeah,
white. I would then subtract zero point 0.5. So there was differences, and I
right,
know my Atlas it was different, and when different when Meridia was different. So I think almost all the instruments are pretty test repeatable with themselves, but they're not comparable to each other. So I
right,
think no matter what you have, if you learn your instrument and you because my goal with Ortho K is to fit the largest lens I can possibly fit. I mean, because that's
Right.
that's going to get me centration, and centration is like 90% of the battle. If you can center an Ortho K lens, you're going to get a good outcome, as long as it doesn't bind to the eye.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's why I like to kind of calculate that 90 to 95%. So, like, I don't have a set like point 0.7. I just pull out my phone and I'm like, all right, what's point 0.9, what's point 0.95, and I look at it and I kind of look at the eye and I decide
Yeah,
if I'm closer to a point 0.95 or a point 0.9 based on what I think with my maps. So I'm just kind of somewhere in between there. So
yeah.
depends.
I'll round up unless I have a very tight lid or Asian eye. Sometimes I'll round down. Um,
Yeah,
but in general, I think you get a feel for your instrument. Most of these instruments are pretty repeatable within the same eye in the same circumstances. They're very repeatable, but they don't compare to each other. If you have two topographers, don't expect them to give you the same HVID or white to white in HVID. They're definitely unique and different.
right.
I have another question for you. I noticed on your freeform design for your Ortho K, you use Prism, and I use Prism too often. But I
Hmm.
didn't see the Prism on your corneal lens, freeform lens. Well, did I just not see it, or did you not use it?
I don't even recall. I don't know. So maybe I didn't. Now I have to go back. Uh. Did I use it? Did I not use it? I can't tell with my
I
screenshot.
don't can't tell. Yeah, yeah, you have to pull down the.
So I
It
usually
doesn't
like to
look like
use
it from the lens design. You can usually see the Prism,
you can see
especially
it.
when you're in the
So
180.
some of my early on lenses, I had some doctors telling me not to use Prism, and
Yep.
I don't know why. And then I switched over recently to using Prism within the last year because I had some lenses that weren't really stable, and so I started putting Prism on there myself. But I don't know. I had some doctors when I first started telling me not to use Prism because they said the lens should center itself and like it might weigh it down and what
Well,
have you.
you pointed out that lens had a plus or minus on the base curve and on the power. I look at that number, and if that plus or minus is 0.02, almost nothing, then I don't bother with Prism. But when there's a
Yeah.
significant plus or minus there, I need that lens to sit where it needs to sit. Otherwise, when there's no differential there, that lens can spin and it won't have much of an effect at all. But
Oh
when
yeah,
there is
for
that
sure.
plus or minus of a quarter diopter or zero point 0.2 millimeters, it's you got to have that lens where it belongs, in my opinion. But I've also seen Prism cause lenses to descender inferiorly and
Mhm.
bind too. So there's pluses and
I
minuses to
know.
Prism, I think. So
Exactly. I know. I think the more like unique the eye is, I think it typically will lock in better on its own. It should because of how like, you know, if it
exactly,
has
and
a
the
ton
less
of like
unique it is,
elevation
I mean,
differences,
a
it
G-SIM and an
should
R-SIM
just
will
lock
work
in.
just as well on those pretty normal
Yeah.
eyes.
Yeah.
I have another question for you. I love that case, that RK case, and the difference in the fit is remarkable, and I've seen that happen too. One of the things I discovered with corneal lenses, a use for it, is I've hundreds of patients wearing corneal GPs for keratoconus that are relatively happy, but the lenses are small. They're decentered over the
Yes.
cone. They follow the cone, and they all have glare at night. But they've all gotten used to it over decades of wear, and that just has become normal. I've come to ask that question: if the glare is bothering them, let's refit you with a corneal lens. And I've had a lot of success in producing much larger lenses with much larger optic zones with just as good optics, if not better, and a reduction in the glare that they've come to think is normal, which really isn't
Right.
normal. So it is a really great use. I love the way you use it for those two different eyes. I mean,
Yeah.
very interesting case and pretty dramatic at how much nicer that fit is.
Yeah, it was great. And then of course his graft his graft actually had some sutures in it still for years. And three of them popped. And so his cornea completely shifted shape. So I had to
Oh,
do a redesign
you had
on
to
it.
do a refit.
He
Yeah.
was so bummed out. He was like, "No, my lens doesn't fit." But it was fine. So we just took a new map and we redesigned it. But that I mean that was so I have some interesting pictures of after three sutures right in one quadrant popped, and all of a sudden his
Yeah,
astigmatism and
yeah,
elevation change
significant shift.
shifted.
Yeah. I
But
have a
no,
question.
it's been great.
I have an Ortho K question for you for washing out. I mean, I'm sure you must get patients referred to you already wearing Ortho K lenses in the design. And one of the things I often see is a lot of the standard design Ortho K lenses, you have to tolerate residual astigmatism. You have to tolerate um, sometimes glare that you can't get rid of because you can't really change much. There's fixed parameters that you can only change so much. And a lot of times when the kids turn 16, they start to get their driver's license. All of a sudden,
Right.
glare appeared. The day before, they had no glare, and now they have their driver's permit and they have glare. So, can you just mention a little bit about what's your process for washing people out if you're going to switch designs with AutoK?
Ugh, it's the worst. No, I mean, it's if you're just switching from like it depends. If you're just switching from a standard design to a standard design, sometimes you don't have to wash out as much. If you're doing a wave lens, I feel like you need to wash out, or you need to have the baseline map.
Right.
Which if you have an office that's been open long enough, you might still have the baseline map from when they were younger, maybe. And you can always design a lens from there. I don't know. Have you ever done that, Bill?
I
Where you
have.
grabbed a
Yeah,
baseline map from like
I've
6 years
actually
ago?
gotten topographies from referring doctors,
Did
old
you? And were
baselines, and
able to
I've
do it?
used them because I've washed them out. Now it's week two. It's week three, and I'm putting them in soft lenses to buy time so they don't
I
freak
know.
out and the parents don't freak out. Washouts are
Yeah.
never fun.
They're
And the
not
biggest thing
fun.
with wave freeform lenses, if you wash them out too quickly and they're not
Yeah.
done, you'll have a perfectly bad lens.
Yep, exactly. So
Yeah.
it's really super critical. A lot of times it usually takes at least 2 to 3 weeks. It just depends on how long they've been in the lens for. I mean,
Yeah.
I had an adult that came over from international and he had been wearing them for 15 years and his lenses were garbage, like so decentered. It took him like over a month, maybe even 6 weeks before he was like totally washed out. I didn't even know what prescription he was. Like he didn't even recall himself because he had been in them for so long. He had no clue, what he was going to
Yeah.
wash out to. And that's tricky because you have to give them all. I give them a lot of these like trial lenses, right? You're like, okay, you're going to start with one and then move up to two, three, four. Just put a lens in, and if it seems blurry, just put a stronger one in. Um, so yeah, it's not always the most fun thing, but with Wave, you have to do it or grab a baseline map if you can. That'd be great.
One more comment I'm going to make. I love that you brought up the fact that you design your lenses red and yellow. I do exactly the same thing. The only thing that I do differently is I replace lenses every year in Ortho-K no matter what. It's just you get a new
Yep,
pair every year. I
same.
set that before we even start to fit. Year two, they get green and violet. So on the
Oh,
even years, because I've had kids not only mix up with their siblings their lenses, but mix up their
God,
lenses from last year with this year, and measuring a freeform lens in a radioscope or in lensometer can be a little bit of a
possible.
nightmare. So yeah, so I love that idea, and I've done that too. I love the red and yellow, but they get the red and yellow in the first and third and fifth pair, and they get the green and violet on the second, the
That is a
even
good
pairs.
that's a good idea. I love that.
Yeah,
Because yes,
it
I do
helps
the same
because
thing.
they mess them up. They come in with right and left, and I agree with you. I would never use blue and green in the same pair of lenses because the blue and greens are just too difficult to tell apart.
It's just so hard to
But
tell
yeah,
apart.
but the violets stand out with the green nicely. You can't mix those up. And the violet has the L, the green has the R, so it works nicely like that. But I love the color thing. The parents appreciate it so much because it saves so many phone calls to the office. I think maybe I mixed up my lenses. I'm not sure. What color
Yeah.
are they? Yeah. So
Yep, the color thing, and then yeah, I replace them every single year. I also tell them that up front. I just say, and then year two, you know, your fitting price is going to be lower, and then here's your bundle. It comes with another pair of lenses, and that's its own kind of conversation. If you do like a
yeah.
global thing that includes free lenses with it, or what
Well,
it is, I
I
just
mean,
tell them that they need to replace them every year. And it's because they're wearing them, and if the lens warps, if it gets too much debris on it, they're not going to see well. It just there's no question. There's no, are you going to you're going to replace them? Like you are going to replace them. Here
yeah.
they are.
The other thing I do also is once the fit is done, and hopefully it's done on the first lens, at the 1 month follow up when everything is finished, and then now I'm going to see him every 3 months. I always say you need a backup pair of lenses. If you're going to summer camp, you need a backup pair, and that backup pair is the opposite color also. So and
Oh,
then on year two they can just if they've never worn the backup pair, the year two becomes well that's your pair of lenses. We're going to order you a new backup pair that's going to be for year three, but they always have two pairs of lenses for travel, for problems. So they don't panic on Sunday night when they've lost their lens and they have to go to school on Monday. All those things that happen with
Yep.
kids.
Yep.
But great information. I love those two cases. Those are really great cases. I want to thank you for tonight for sharing your expertise and information. I want to thank everyone who joined tonight, and I wish you all a great evening. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.